Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Blue Beetle. Let's talk about it. So Blue Beetle is directed by Angel Manuel Soto, and this is the latest DCEU. Is this the beginning of James Gunn's DC? Yes, no, maybe so. We don't know. But it's the latest DC movie that was originally intended to be released on HBO Max. But the executives at Warner Brothers saw this and also considered the fact that they cancelled Batgirl entirely and decided to give this a theatrical release instead. Put a pin on that. We'll talk about it later. But another reason why this movie is also very significant is because it is the very first Latino-led superhero movie. Yay! Yay for representation. Yes, 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 we love to see it. Okay, listen, I know that the Latino community has been asking for greater representation in Hollywood, period. Okay, but especially within the superhero space, a lot of Latino people saw films like Black Panther and Shang-Chi and were like, what about us? Like, when are we gonna get our turn to see ourselves as superheroes the way that we deserve to? And so I'm really happy to see that we finally got our very first Latino superhero in Blue Beetle. You guys know how I feel about representation in Hollywood. Surely you should know. But I'm a huge advocate for it. I think that people deserve to see themselves represented on screen, especially because Hollywood is no longer just, you know, a Californian market. It's no longer just an American market. It's a global market. So this global audience should absolutely be represented in the productions that these studios produce. But having said that though, as important as I think I will know representation to be, you guys will know that the first and foremost thing that I am the biggest fan of is good quality content. Excellent content, okay? That is what I'm looking for first and foremost. And I actually think that the writers, directors, studios owe it to these underrepresented groups to produce high quality content that is centered on them, because otherwise it does them a disservice. Otherwise people start making excuses like, oh, the reason why this project flopped is because it's about women, or if it's because it's about black people, or it's because it's about Asians. But instead, the whole time, the reason why that project flopped is because it's bad. It's bad. It's a bad film, that's why it flopped, or it's a bad TV show. It has nothing to do with the group represented. But these folks will leap to the accusation with a quickness, and so these studios owe it to these underrepresented groups to make sure that they have ticked all the right boxes to create a really great story first and foremost, so that they can, you know, center it on this underrepresented group and allow them to have that representation that so many people crave. And I mention this because I don't think that Blue Beetle accomplished this 120%, I'm sorry to say. But we'll dive into my thoughts on this movie in this video. But before we do so, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, guys, let's get into my thoughts on this movie. So first of all, let's dive into the story here, and it's centered on the character of Jaime Reyes, who is originally from Mexico, but he and his family live in the DC fictional town of Palermo City. And this is a town that seems to be, you know, really populated by other people from Latin America, and it's kind of in this like poorer area, and you can see the, you know, richer part of the city kind of in the horizon, as we see with a lot of real life cities. Essentially, you have Jaime and his, you know, immigrant family living there, and they've fallen on difficult times, as he discovers when he comes back home from university, and he sees that his parents have actually lost their auto shop, and as a result of their lack of income, they're on the verge of losing their house. And on top of all of that, all of this stress and anxiety has led to his father developing health problems, and he actually had a heart attack. So all of this is kind of dropped on him when he arrives back in Palermo City, and he realizes the dire circumstances that his family is in. And this adds a lot of pressure to Jaime, as you can imagine. He is the first person in their family to have graduated from uni, and so he is putting pressure on himself to deliver and make that sacrifice worth it, because he's, you know, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and he wants to ensure that he's able to deliver on giving his family a better life, pursuing a successful career to pull them out of, you know, poverty. And so he's just seeing how bad things have gotten whilst he was away, and really wanting to push himself and drive himself to success to pull his family along with him. And this to me is where the film shines, the exploration of the Reyes family, this beautiful family that love each other so much. They're there for one another, they support each other, they're there for Jaime's, you know, key moments in life, like when he's about to get his first new job. They are so wonderful towards each other, and it is a pleasure to watch them on screen. And like I said, this is the best part of this film, hands down. Not to mention, we have yet another exploration of the immigrant experience, this time around through the lens of a Latino family. I think there'll be a lot of Latinos who watch this film who will be able to see their own families and their own selves, you know, in this film, which I think is beautiful. And also the rest of us who aren't Latino but are from immigrant families are also able to see ourselves and our families in this film. You know, we have a lot of commonalities across cultures and ethnicities, and so I was watching this like, oh, I know exactly I know exactly who she is, I know exactly who he is. Like, in my family, I could absolutely relate to this portrayal of the immigrant experience. And like I said, that is what enabled this film to shine for me. Those were the best parts by far. But this story is definitely a tale of the haves and have-nots. And on one side of Palermo City, we have, you know, a lot of these immigrant families coming from Latin American countries. Then on the other side, you have the wealthier part of the city, right, that is filled with these like skyscrapers and corporate buildings, and the tallest of them all is Cord Industries, and that's the antagonist of this movie. Essentially, you have Susan Sarandon's character, who is the head of Cord Industries, who is developing these like weapons, these like essentially Iron Man suits, or rather like War Machine suits, right? She wants to develop these War Machine suits, and she's using the powers of this ancient scarab beetle in order to do so. This beetle seems to have like supernatural abilities, and maybe it's even like alien technology or something, and she's able to harness that power to create these weapons. Now, Cord Industries, what used to create weapons back in the day, you know, when the grandfather was in charge. But then Susan Sarandon's brother took over, and he decided to create technology to like help people or whatever. They're very vague about it, okay? But essentially, he was good, you know, he was the good sibling, and Susan Sarandon was the evil sibling, and she took things back to the evil path, creating weapons once again, once her brother passed away, or so we thought. But we fast forward in the future a little bit, and we see that Jaime wasn't able to get this high-paying job fresh out of uni like he wanted to, and so he's kind of working as this like housekeeper or something. And it's during this job that he's working with his sister that he stumbles across the Cords. He stumbles across Victoria Cord, portrayed by Susan Sarandon, and Jenny Cord, who's portrayed by Bruna Marquezine. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing her name. But it's there where he's introduced to Jenny, and he's like head over heels for her the moment that he sees her, right? But she promises him a job after she gets him fired from the current one. And it's when he's on his way to seeing her in the Cord offices that she stumbles into him and gives him the Big Belly Burger box that actually has the scarab beetle. And he goes back home, and it merges with him. You know, he is the chosen one, and all of a sudden he has the powers of Iron Man. All of a sudden he has the powers of the Iron Spider, actually, if we really want to be accurate. And, you know, chaos ensues because Cord Industries want their scarab beetle back in order to create those weapons. So they're chasing after him, and they won't let anything stop them in their way, even his own family. And I have to say, unfortunately, it's this part of the story that I found a little bit lacking. The superhero elements to this superhero story, to me, just weren't particularly inspired. They weren't refreshing. They weren't invigorating. You know, they were just more of the same that we have seen in this hugely saturated superhero landscape. And so I think it's a huge disservice disservice to this film ultimately, that they did have such a bland story to tell with this Latino superhero. They could have done so much more with the character, but there were just so many missed opportunities that I was just left a little bit underwhelmed when all was said and done. Okay, so now that we've gone through the overall story, I just want to dive into some of my nitpicks with the superhero elements of this film before we dive into the characters and the actors who I think were the best part of the movie. So the first major problem that I had with this story was the villain. I think Victoria Cord as a villain was just so underwhelming, so generic, you know, evil CEO. Oh my god, we've seen it a million times. And considering the similarities that this film has to other, you know, superhero movies that we've seen before, it certainly doesn't help that the villain is just so generic on top of everything else. I think if it at least had a very, you know, interesting and compelling villain, I could at least forgive it for its generic storyline, but Susan Sarandon was just like phoning it in. Like she was, you know, she was here to collect a paycheck, okay? She wasn't here to reinvent the wheel. She wasn't about to give us a crazy, you know, Joker performance or anything. She was just a generic CEO bad guy, and like, yeah, you know, capitalism is bad. Really? No shit. And like I said, this film is very reminiscent of other superhero movies like Iron Man, for instance. And so seeing Susan Sarandon portraying a discount Obadiah Stane was just like, you're really not helping yourselves here. And not to mention, you know, Obadiah Stane has never been considered one of the best MCU villains, but at the very least, he had a personal connection to Tony Stark. You know, like he was supposed to take care of Tony Stark after his parents died. And so you have that kind of, yeah, connection. And then there's the element of betrayal when it's revealed that he was, you know, selling weapons to both sides of a war and making double the profits and hiding a bunch of shady stuff from Tony as he was in his drunken out party boy phase. And so again, that betrayal at least adds some dramatic tension to the story. Whereas here, you know, Victoria Cord has no real connection to Jaime at all or his family, and it just so happens that the Scarab Beetle landed on his lap and chose him, and that's why she's chasing after him. There is no personal beef there. She just wants her weapons back. Now, I will say one element of the villain story that they did pretty well was with Victoria's lackey, okay, with her kind of henchman, who was another Latino character, and he was pretty much brainwashed. He was basically the Winter Soldier. I remember there's a sequence where he's kind of deprogrammed, as it were, and he like has all of these memories come back to him, and he was essentially the Winter Soldier. Okay, like this film is so derivative. We'll talk about it in a second. But yeah, I do think though, despite the fact that it is very derivative, we've seen it before a million times. I did like the fact that in the end he kind of snapped out of it and was able to, you know, relate to Jaime because he is also Latin American. And he, you know, realizes the history, the intense history that Latin American countries have with the US and the US government and corporations, and the fact that Victoria was wrapped up in that, you know, for her own benefit as well, showing that she was actually the enemy all along. Even though she tried to brainwash him into thinking that she put him through hell, through torture, through mutilation, okay, through abuse, for his benefit, he finally realized that he had been used and abused, and she was the enemy all along. So I do think that was a good arc for that character. It was a nice change of pace. But other than that, Victoria as a villain was just really lackluster. She didn't do any of the heavy lifting herself. At least Obadiah put on a suit. Do you know what I mean? Like, at least he put on the old Iron Man suit, like something. Whereas Susan Sarandon was just sitting there in a helicopter going, yes, kill him, kill him. Like, you know. My next issue with this movie was, as I mentioned, it's extremely derivative. And it's tough, you know, because at this point there have been, what, like 17,000 superheroes? Literally like 17,486 superhero movies, if we want to be exact. There have been quite a few few. Yeah, there have been quite a few in the last 23 years alone. And so it feels like every single plot point, every single villain, every single plot twist has been done again and again and again. I think they could have tried a bit harder. I think they could have done. I think they were leaning on the fact that Blue Beetle is the first Latin American superhero too much, and they forgot to give us like a compelling, new, exciting story that feels a hell of a lot different to what we have gotten before. They were leaning on the representation as a crutch, and as I said before, first and foremost, I am looking for an excellent story, for good quality content, and then if it has that representation, then I think it boosts it. I think it is a really great thing for that community to see themselves be represented in something that's good. But if they using the representation as a crutch and then relying on these other tropes and storylines that we've seen time and time again, then I think it does a disservice to that representation. And unfortunately, I think that's exactly what happened here. We have elements of Captain America the Winter Soldier, we have a lot of elements of Iron Man. I mean, Blue Beetle is essentially if Iron Man wasn't rich, right? Like, he's basically if Tony Stark wasn't rich and wasn't a genius, because the technology just falls on his lap. Like, he's just a less compelling Iron Man. The only reason why I was invested in the character in reality is because of his amazing family and because of his great portrayal by the actor. Other than that, you know, on the face of it, there's really not much going on here that's so different from Iron Man that it feels worth even telling the story. And the next issue that I had with this movie is the fact that it's very clearly a HBO Max movie. Like, the production value of this film is not theatrical for me. It's not cinematic enough for me. It feels like a very good streaming movie. And I think that's a huge shame. You know, I would have loved it if Warner Brothers actually took the time and the money and the effort and the talent and the foresight and the whatever. I wish Warner Brothers would have bothered. You know, I wish Warner Brothers would have actually bothered to give the Latino community a film that was actually on par with a Black Panther or a Wonder Woman or a Shang-Chi, you know, giving us that representation but still giving us that high production value that feels very cinematic. You can tell that they wanted people to see this film on the biggest screen available, and unfortunately I just don't think Blue Beetle is that. They may have elevated it to a theatrical release, but that doesn't mean it was ready for it. It doesn't mean it was ready for it, you know. And this film had a budget of 100 million, which is very, very low for a superhero film. I really wish Warner Brothers had, you know, devoted all of the budget and all of the time and the pomp and circumstance to this film centered on this Latino superhero. I will say, you know, if there's one thing that this film has going for it in terms of production, it's the CGI, because the CGI is actually decent. Especially in comparison to the last DC movie that we just got, The Flash. Oh, it's leaps and bounds better than anything in The Flash, which is crazy because The Flash had triple the budget. Like, that's insane. By the way, The Flash is technically I was thinking this whilst I was watching the movie. Barry Allen is technically half Latino in The Flash. So, like, technically speaking, isn't he the first Latino superhero? He's not marketed as such, and I guess, you know, he's only half Latino because his mother spoke Spanish, so, like, I shouldn't assume. Maybe she's just, like, Spanish. But, you know, he's Hispanic at the very least. So, like, technically, Barry Allen is the first Latino or Hispanic superhero in the DC universe. Anywho, the CG in Blue Beetle is leaps and bounds better than anything in The Flash. So at least it has that going for it. It's time to dive into the major positive of this film, and that is absolutely the Reyes family. Hands down. They were an incredible emotional core for this movie, and I was super invested in their relationship, in their familial bond, and in their story. You know, I think it was, like I said, a really wonderful exploration of an immigrant family, something that I and millions of people, billions of people around the world can relate to, but in particular, of course, people in the Latin American community. And I think, you know, more than anything, the characters and therefore the actors had brilliant chemistry together. They were very convincing as this authentic Mexican family. And I think that's down to the actors' brilliant performances in this film. Now, whilst I think it's a shame still that this film didn't quite get the like Black Panther experience, where we could have gotten to like top-notch, super famous A-list Latino actors portraying the Reyes family. Like they could have really stepped it up in terms of the talent involved as well as the production design and the plots, and yeah, as well as everything else. We could have gotten a top-notch cast. But even though this is largely a cast of unknowns, at least to me, everyone came to work. You know, everyone came to work focused, ready to do a good job, and do a good job they did. So I loved the entire family. I thought that they were all great. But if I had to choose some standouts, I would say George Lopez as Rudy. Icon, like he was actually probably like my favorite character, honestly, maybe second favorite character if I'm being fair, but like he was great. You know, he portrays Uncle Rudy, who is Jaime's father's brother, and you can just tell that this guy has so much intelligence and knowledge and, you know, ability, and it's just a shame because he wasn't able to go down the traditional route of getting an education, getting a degree, getting an internship, you know, moving up in a corporate ladder or whatever. He wasn't able to pursue that kind of career path, and so he has so much untapped potential in him, even as this, you know, older guy. But fortunately, he is given that opportunity at the very end, and I can just imagine that in this fictional world, he would accomplish great things because he was so clever, and he had that raw talent that really needed to be harnessed and exercised, and in the right environment, he could be the Tony Stark of that world, and I think that's amazing to see. But again, it's a commentary on how there are so many people who have that untapped potential, but they have the misfortune of being born in the wrong place in the wrong time, and so we never get to see what they could have accomplished. Another standout to me was Milagro, who is Jaime's younger sister. She was also a really great character. I love how, you know, sarcastic she was. They just had that like sibling rivalry relationship, which was relatable. But also, you know, they kind of stood up for one another. I mean, this was a very supportive family all around, so she was never too tough on him, and she, you know, really looked up to her brother and pushed him to do the right thing. And it was so heartbreaking to see her be so devastated over her father's death. Like, she was literally just over his body, watching him pass away, and it was heartbreaking to see the character go through that. And then there's that moment where Nana, the grandmother, tells her that now is not the time to cry, and at that point I was tearing up myself. At that point I was like, yes, it is the time to cry. But you know, again, like I can relate to that. You know, I can relate to having family members like that, like aunties and grandmas, cocos, who do have that mindset of like, we don't have time to process these emotions at the moment, we need to get stuff done, and then afterwards, you know, when the dust has settled, we can mourn, then we can grieve. And by the way, unsurprisingly, Nana was also a huge standout to me. Loved her, loved my good sis. She was so excited to have that huge gun in her hands. I was like, are we sure giving Nana a gun is a good idea? But she seemed to know her way around the gun. She seemed to know, again, she's been through a lot. Okay, she's been through wars, she's been through terror, she's been through American imperialism, so she knows her way around a gun. But yes, at the center of it all, we have Jaime Reyes, who is portrayed by Zolo Maridueña. And I thought he was really good in this movie. I will say overall the casting did feel a little bit TV, you know, a little bit CW-esque. If I'm being honest, he didn't really give me cinematic, but I do think he did a pretty decent job. Again, everyone came to work and everyone was prepared to do some actoring, and I think he definitely, you know, delivered. He was really charming, he was really charismatic. I do think he made for a compelling lead character, and I think he had great chemistry with his family. He had decent, okay-ish chemistry with Jenny, I guess. I could have done without the Jenny Cord love story, if I'm being honest. I feel like there are a lot of unnecessary love stories in these movies, and I know that people complain that the superhero genre is very sterile and like asexual. I've always been fine with it, me personally, but like these forced love stories to me are just 10 times worse. But listen, if you enjoyed Jenny and Jaime, then you know, good for you. Live your life, okay? I'm happy for you. But I could have done without that storyline. But anywho, I think they were okay together, even though it was really forced and heavily telegraphed from the beginning. And in terms of Blue Beetle as a superhero, I think he's good. Yeah, he's pretty good. He's fine. He's basically carried by his family. Honestly, it's Blue Beetle and the Reyes family, pretty much. Again, you know, his powers are very derivative. We've seen it before. The Iron Spider comes to mind in particular, especially because of the arms. And unfortunately, he wasn't given like a standout villain to really go up against. You know, the villain that he had was pretty underwhelming, so it doesn't feel like he was truly tested by someone who, you know, stood a chance. It was just like, yeah, he managed to defeat her. Okay. And then it all just kind of conveniently ends with Jenny Cord taking over the entire company, even though she has no experience. Like, the kids are running the block. The kids are running the block, okay, despite the fact that she has no experience and she was just doing some miscellaneous charity work beforehand. But fine, she's now CEO and she's going to change the company's entire raison d'etre within a matter of weeks, so that they're no longer weapons manufacturers and they're producing stuff to better the world or whatever. Like, fine. Okay. So guys, overall, when it comes to my thoughts on Blue Beetle, I thought it was fine. Like, I thought it was okay. It was pretty good. I wanted this momentous occasion to feel as, you know, grand and impactful as the releases of, you know, Wonder Woman or Black Panther. Like, I just wanted it to feel like a whole occasion, because that's what they deserve after being underserved by Hollywood for so long, whilst also simultaneously being one of the biggest movie markets in America. I just think it's a really big shame that, you know, we just have this movie that was originally a HBO Max movie, it just be plopped on the big screen and it doesn't quite feel like it fits there. It's not cinematic enough. Whilst it would have been a phenomenal HBO Max movie, it just doesn't quite hit the mark as a theatrical release, especially not within months of seeing, you know, Mission Impossible, Barbie, Oppenheimer, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Like, those films scream cinema, and this screams HBO Max, unfortunately. And one final note that I want to say before I give my final score for this film, this is kind of going off on a tangent talking about representation in Hollywood overall, because whilst I didn't adore this film as much as I wanted to, I still think it's incredible that we got a superhero movie that is centered on this Latino character and on this Latino family. I cannot stress enough how important I think this representation is, and just how wonderful it is to see. Like, it pleases me, it actually brings a smile to my face to see these different communities be represented in such, you know, huge blockbuster franchises. And listen, honestly, as much as people love to talk about how true cinema is, you know, a Christopher Nolan movie or a David Fincher movie or a Quentin Tarantino movie or Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg, all the same kinds of blokes that they always love to talk about, people love to hail that as true cinema. But in reality, those directors have been kicking around for decades upon decades upon decades, and for the most part, they have had no interest in presenting the kinds of representation that we see in where? The superhero landscape. Okay, yes, you heard me correctly. Superhero movies have been pioneers in mainstream representation for the last 20 years or so. And these other directors, the ones who are hailed as producing real cinema, yeah, they do what they do best and they do it really well. They seldom pay dust to underrepresented groups like the Latino community, like the Black community, like the Asian community, like the Pacific Islander community. And we have had superhero films on all of those communities come out in the last couple of decades. So like, that has to count for something, right? It counts for a lot in my book, personally. So at the end of the day, as much as people love to worship at the altar of Christopher Nolan, for instance, you have to remember that if it were up to him, if it were up to directors like him, we would have never, I repeat, never gotten a Wonder Woman, never gotten a Black Panther, and certainly never gotten a Blue Beetle. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Blue Beetle a 6.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Blue Beetle, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch you videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!